Hello.
Hello, hello there.
How are you? We can't see you. Where are you at?
Can you see me?
No, we can't.
Let me see here. What do I do here? Start.
Start like on
video,
the left
maybe?
corner. Like there you are.
I think the sound is on, but the video is not on. Okay, I'm trying.
Okay.
Yep.
Start.
Okay. Ah.
There you are. Oh my God, I'm so
my
excited.
book-lined study here.
How are you, ST? How are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
this is great.
This is great. Very nice to meet you. I am Gwendolyn. It's a pleasure to finally get to see you. I am very, very excited and very honored and very thankful that you agreed to join us tonight to have this amazing chat about Dunsany, who's one of the loves of our lives, I guess. And there's several readers of Perla Ediciones who joined us last minute, but they really wanted to come and meet you. So we are all super excited and glad and again thankful that you agreed to be a part of this project. As you know, you are not only a part of the King of Elfland's Daughter as the one who wrote the afterword, but also we have you have your copies.
Absolutely beautiful book.
Thank you so much. So you've also worked with us on Arthur Magen's The House of Souls and Algernon Blackwood, The Lost Valley and Other Stories. So les pido a los chicos que se incorporen, que apaguen su micrófono, chicos. Esto va un poco para Mariana, que creo que acaba de entrar. I'm sorry, I'm asking them to please turn off their mics. Okay.
I was going to say the transmission's a little, disrupted every now and then, but
oh, okay. Do you think it's my fault?
Computer is connected to. No, maybe I'm connected to Wi-Fi. Is that a problem? Do you think with Zoom?
I don't think there's a problem.
I'm pretty sure I did a Zoom interview a little while ago. Okay, well let's hope for the best and see what happens.
Okay, I can see you perfectly. I can hear you perfectly, and I guess the rest of the guys can also see you. So I have a little plan here. So I went through your fantastic book. For all of the guys who are listening to us, Esti wrote this amazing volume, Creator of Gods and Men. And to me, you actually are the first critical author who goes so deep into Lord Dunsany's both work and life. You also keep saying that you are not so obsessed with his life as much as you are with his work, because his work tells you a lot about his life.
Absolutely.
And I think this is the most enlightening volume we can find about Lord Dunsany as such. All of the guys that are here with us are super fond of Lord Dunsany, so we want to hear everything about it. So if you're okay with it, I have some questions, and this is supposed to be a conversation that involves everything. I want to hear you, if that's okay with you. So, and in the end, we're gonna ask the guys to share their questions in case they have any, which I'm sure they do.
Sure.
So first of all, you start saying, the ignorance of the work of Lord Dunsany by the critical establishment is at once understandable and mystifying. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I'll tell you. First of all, I'm sorry to say it, but the pronunciation of his name is Dunsany.
Oh, I didn't know
is
that.
on the second syllable, not the first.
Thank you. We didn't know that. Dunsany. Okay, cool.
Yes. They told me. I'm sorry to say it. One of the great people who makes this mistake is Neil Gaiman, who's a great admirer of Lord Dunsany, but he always says Dunsany. Yes. So somebody will have to correct him on that.
Great.
I don't have the courage to correct him.
We can't blame you.
Anyway, all right. Lord Dunsany. See, he occupied a very curious position in. Oh, you some wine? Is that wine?
Yes, it is.
I probably should get some wine, but I'll have my wife get me some maybe later. Lord Dunsany occupied a very strange position in Anglo-American literature at the time. during his lifetime, he was actually incredibly famous, at least in his earlier first 20 years of his career, for example. There was a time in New York City, and he was called America's favorite lord. Americans pretend to be very, lacking in class consciousness. We don't have lords and ladies and earls and dukes and things like that. But in fact, we're fascinated with nobility. It's ridiculous, but there it is. So when Lord Dunsany came here to lecture in 1919, this is when H.P. Lovecraft saw him in Boston in person in 1919, he was greeted with adulation. He was like a rock star, his plays were put on Broadway, over and over again. I mean, and were greatly successful. But the critical establishment really didn't embrace him, and for a number of reasons, especially in Ireland. And that's because, first of all, Dunsany didn't write so much about Ireland in his earlier career. He did later on, but not these fantasy lands like in King of Elfland's Daughter. And therefore, it was thought that he was not helping the Irish Renaissance, the literary Renaissance that was going on with people like Yeats and Lady Gregory and those people. Even more unfortunate for Dunsany is that he was what is called a unionist. That is to say, he did not believe in the separation of Ireland from Great Britain politically. And that made him really disliked by a lot of people. In fact, some people considered him like this, a titled, lord with all these, big property in Ireland and oppressing the poor, which he didn't do, things like that. So he was considered on the wrong side of the whole Irish independence movement, and that basically made him persona non grata to a lot of the Irish critics at the time. And the fact is that people, even now, many mainstream critics don't really understand how to read fantasy literature. They don't get it. They think it's always just an escape from life and reality, when it isn't. Dunsany says a lot of important things about life in this book and in all his writings, but he uses fantasy to get that point across rather than realism like Faulkner or Hemingway or those writers. So Dunsany just fell between the cracks, and he has survived because now fantasy literature itself has become more accepted critically, and writers like Lovecraft and Tolkien and Ursula Le Guin have championed Dunsany, and now he's come back.
And you just touched another point that I wanted to bring up, which is you kept mentioning that we can sense Dunsany. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but yes, I'll try. Dunsany. So we can feel Dunsany in Ursula K. Le Guin, H.P. Lovecraft, and Tolkien. There are so many more authors who have actually been inspired by Dunsany, and even modern readers are not aware of that. What other names can you think of to speak of the great names of our times?
Well, I'll tell you, Neil Gaiman. I don't like all his work, but Gaiman is a great supporter. In fact, I would like him one of these days. I will beg him to write a screenplay of The King of Elfland's Daughter and have Guillermo del Toro make a movie out of it or something like that. That would be my dream.
Yes, yes.
Because it would be a movie like better, perhaps. And actually participated currently in some sort of kind of a little opera based on King of Elfland's Daughter. I have the CD somewhere. I can't find it at the moment, but it's a very beautiful piece, and he did some writing for that. So he's clearly influenced by Dunsany. I haven't read enough of Gaiman's work to know specifically how he was influenced, but I'm sure he was. I can't. Oddly enough, I am not all that well versed in the literature of fantasy beyond Dunsany and Tolkien, but I'm sure his influence extends well beyond that.
Okay, cool. Yes. So you wrote something that I found very impressive, and I was not aware of it because no one knows as much as you do about the topic. But you know he read the Grimm and Andersen and Poe, but still his influences are almost impossible to identify. His work is a systematic demonstration of how fantasy can be used for philosophical purposes. I love that. I love that.
Well, I did discuss the fact, that we don't. I mean, it would be good to have a really good biography of Dunsany. There is one out there. It was written about 40, 50 years ago by Mark Amory, just called Lord Dunsany, a biography. I'm sorry to say it is not a good one. The
Mhm.
author didn't seem to get didn't even seem interested in Dunsany. Whatever. There are lots of papers and letters and things that we would like to have access to. And I've been to Dunsany Castle. Dunsany Castle is a castle outside of Dublin, 60 miles outside of Dublin, built in the late 12th century. you know 1190 about, and it is still occupied the family of Lord. There is a current Lord Dunsany, a relatively young man, about 40 years old, maybe younger even, Randall Plunkett, Lord Dunsany, the 21st Lord Dunsany. He is the great grandson of the writer Dunsany, and has a great admiration for him, of course. And I've been there, and in fact, I helped to catalog some of the papers of Lord Dunsany. I spent 2 weeks there cataloging manuscripts and novels, essays, poetry, short stories. But we didn't have time. My colleague Martin Anderson from Sweden did not have time to get to his letters. There are lots and lots of letters that he wrote that are still there. Letters he wrote to his wife, Lady Dunsany, Beatrice, telling about his travels, for throughout Africa and Asia and elsewhere. We would like to have better documentary evidence as to what Dunsany read, at various times in his life, and it's just not there. Um, uh, I believe Amory did say that Dunsany read Nietzsche around 1904, right around the time he was writing The Gods of Pegana, and I think there is a definite Nietzschean influence in that book of stories.
Well, Esti, when I was told that I should send like the other copies to the Dunsany Castle, I almost fainted. Like, what? So, like, the literary agent told me, okay, so you have to send 7 copies
Yeah.
of the book to the castle. And I thought they were making fun of me. Like, you're kidding me, right? No, no, no. There's a Dunsany Castle, and I was struck at it. So I can't imagine actually going there. So I'm even more jealous of you than I already was.
Well, there's a sad note. The current Lord Dunsany's mother, the Dowager Lady Dunsany, actually died of the coronavirus. She got COVID and died late last year. It was horrible.
Oh my God.
Went to the hospital. I know, it's awful. She went to the hospital. A week later, she was dead. It was just dreadful. And she was, for a time, she was the only occupant of that place. Randall, the current lord, doesn't really live there all that often. And there's a younger brother, Oliver, who I don't think he lives there very often either. So I don't know what's going on at the castle right now, but I'm sure there must be somebody, as a caretaker or something. But yeah, and she, this woman, Maria Alice, Lady Dunsany, was a Brazilian. She was a native of Brazil, and she was, believe me, a world famous architect. She designed all kinds of buildings throughout Latin America and Europe and elsewhere. You'll have to look her up. I'll give you her full name sometime. But she was a
Sure.
brilliant woman. But unfortunately, she died at the age of 71, and
Wow.
so there we are.
It seems you're super connected to the Dunsany family and castle, so we are all very impressed now.
I'd love to go back there. It's a magical place. It's funny because she made some jokes about things. The castle built in 1190. Of course, it's needs updating. And it has been updated. She says, the best time for renovating a castle was the 18th century. Because they knew how to fix things then. So, and even then, because she lived basically alone in this castle, with help, some servants and whatnot, they had to actually close off a lot of it, because it was extremely expensive to maintain, and it was cold. The first time I went there, I just went for a night with my wife in November, and we had to keep our coats on the whole time. You cannot heat a place like that. It's impossible to heat it. Next time when I spent the 2 weeks there, I went in July, and that was better. It was warm and comfortable. But yeah, very strange, fascinating, and he definitely was what is called Anglo-Irish person. He loved his castle, but he also liked England. He had a residence in Kent, the province of Kent in southeast England, called Dunstall Priory, and he did a lot of his writing there, especially when there was the Irish Civil War, in the late teens, early 20s. He got out of there and stayed in England just to get out of the way and not be troubled by all that. So fascinating.
Okay. So let's get to his writing. So you wrote, when he began to write in 1904, the result was an outpouring of inspired writing unparalleled in the history of fantasy fiction, which leads us to a place in which you call, and I got so excited to read it, you call The King of Elfland's Daughter a prose poem, like a novel-length prose poem. Yeah. Let's get to his prose. Tell us what you think about it, how you experience it.
I mean, we could spend the whole session talking about his prose. I think, in my estimation, Lord Dunsany wrote some of the best prose in the history of the English language. It is a commonplace to say, oh yes, he derived a lot of it from the King James Bible, and to some degree, of course, he did. But there's so much more to that. Several, obviously, many different styles of writing in English. There's the very spare type of writing, very bare bones type of writing that we find in Ernest Hemingway, and that itself has a long tradition. Jonathan Swift wrote like that, a number of other writers like that. There's another type of writing that is more lush, that's more florid, if you want to use that term, more richly textured, and that has a long history as well, going back at least to the 15th, 16th centuries. That's the kind of style that Dunsany wrote, but he didn't just write a lot of thick prose with lots of adjectives and things. The magic of his writing comes from his use of metaphor. It is brilliant how he can adapt, manipulate metaphor to convey his ideas. And that's why he wrote fantasy, because fantasy itself is one big metaphor. You talk about imaginary realms, to be sure, but again, those serve as symbols for things in our lives, in real life, that he's trying to convey through fantasy.
Oh, this is super exciting. Okay, so let's get to the novel, if you're okay with it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so go ahead.
Well, I'm going to say, it was only his second novel. For the first 15
Pues sí, es que estoy
I'm sorry.
Career,
I'm sorry, hold on. Marite, could you please turn off your... Marite. I'm sorry, Esti.
Okay.
These are totally unexpected things. So yeah. I guess you can.
Well, that's why you
can
edit this later.
I'm hoping. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So for the first 15 years of his career, he was writing short stories or plays. Didn't have a thought of writing a novel, and that's why I mentioned that body of work that he wrote. It's unbelievable. Gods of Pegana, The Sword of Welleran, A Dreamer's Tales, The Book of Wonder, The Last Book of Wonder, Tales of Three Hemispheres, and then the play volumes. 5 plays of gods and men. I love that title. No offense to women. I mean, he's including women in that formulation too, but he called it plays of gods and men. No matter. And other things like that. I mean, this body of work is simply incredible. I mean, it established Dunsany as an incredibly original voice in fantasy literature. And I think a lot of people didn't know what to make of it, but they loved it because of the prose, because of these incredible conceptions that he had. But by around 1919, 1920, he'd been writing for 15 years. I think he'd come to the end of that particular vein of writing. It seemed as if he was kind of running out of material. And so he started first writing novels. And he wrote one novel before this one called well, it has 2 different titles.
Mr. Rodriguez or something.
Yeah, The Chronicles of Rodriguez is the English title. The American title is Don Rodriguez, Chronicles of Shadow Valley, which is an interesting experiment set back in the so-called golden age of Spain, 15th, 16th century, the time of Cervantes and Don Quixote and things like that. A charming piece of work, but not, to my mind, very substantial. Then the second novel he wrote was The King of Elfland's Daughter. This is the first American edition from I think
can you please let us see it? Could you please put it closer to the?
This is the first American edition.
Oh my God.
I don't have the first UK edition.
That's super exciting.
And I have all these little these little notes that I want to talk about later. But
great.
It's a beautiful. And I'll tell you, well, you probably can't see it very well, but the frontispiece is the great illustration by Sidney Syme
of course,
the hunting of the unicorn. The hunting of the unicorn. Oh, it's spectacular. And I'll tell you, Dunsany Castle has the originals of a lot of these Sidney Syme illustrations, and they're spectacular. You can't even believe how incredible they are in the original as opposed to just in a reproduction. But no. So the King of Elfland's Daughter is, I maintain, a harking back to this older, the style that he had evolved during, the Gods of Pegana period. And the focus, of course, time does not really exist in Elfland, but it does exist in our world, which is the world of Earl. But the difference between Earl and Elfland is actually not nearly as significant as you might think. Aside from the element of time, there are lots of parallels between Earl and Elfland. That's because the word Earl means elf. Goethe, the great German poet, wrote a poem called Der Elfkönig, the Elf King. So the Earl König. So that's what Earl means. So and that harks back to something else that Dunsany wrote, and I'd like to get to it. If you read no other book by Dunsany aside from his fiction, you must read Patches of Sunlight, his gorgeous autobiography. It is one of the best books of autobiography.
You keep quoting it. It's amazing. The quotes were like impressive.
When people say, "Oh, Dunsany just wrote about fantasy worlds that had nothing to do with reality," well, he thought very differently. In Patches of Sunlight, he writes, "The source of all imagination is here in our fields, and creation is beautiful enough for the furthest flights of the poets. What is called realism only falls far behind these flights because it is too meticulously concerned with the detail of material. Mere inventories of rocks are not poetry, but all the memories of crags and hills and meadows and woods and sky that lie in a sensitive spirit are materials for poetry, only waiting to be taken out and to be laid before the eyes of such as care to perceive them." Beautiful state. And it shows how Dunsany was himself inspired by the natural landscape to create both his fantasy worlds and his realistic worlds later on. In fact, Dunsany, I'll tell you, was a pioneering environmentalist, far ahead of his time in battle things like advertising and corruption of food, artificial additives in food, things like that. Way ahead of his time in these matters. But anyway.
And you keep bringing up a sort of contradiction between, yes, the magic world and the real world, and also religion versus paganism, or however we pronounce paganism, or however we pronounce that. Paganism. Okay, yes. Cool. And then the old world versus the modern world. So I think you keep bringing up these three main contradictions throughout his work, and those things come real and very impressive in The King of Elfland's Daughter. Those are the main patterns you can see, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny, when I was doing research for this very podcast, the character of the Freer, Freer, in the novel was puzzling to me because what is a Freer? I didn't even know what a Freer was. It turns out that word is very rare in English. I had to look it up in the big Oxford English Dictionary, the unabridged Oxford English Dictionary. It is a variant of friar, right? Which is obviously a monk or some sort of religious figure. He is the only religious official in Earl, and clearly a representative of Christianity. I don't know how you translated that into Spanish, but
so we translated it into El Libertador, which is the freer. So it's exactly the same, and we have several concerns about it.
Yeah. So when you look it up on Google, and see these modern English dictionaries or definitions on the internet, so a freer is someone who frees somebody. I'm sorry to say that's not the meaning here. It is a variant of friar, which is a religious person. Christian tradition. No matter. But you can tell that Dunsany has a lot of fun with this character and pokes fun at him for failing to recognize the beauty and the wonder of Elfland. At the end of the novel, when the whole of Earl is zoomed into Elfland, there's a little corner that the Freer can maintain as his own little domain, unpolluted by Elfland. It's quite a amusing sight. I am quite confident Dunsany was an atheist, and this is his way of poking fun at religion.
So now that you mention it, there's something that I want to talk about. I adore the way in which you say, out of all of the many characters throughout the King of Elfland's Daughter, perhaps the villain or the villains are like the people of Elfland. No, I'm sorry, of Earl. Especially the parliament, the rustic parliament. That's how you call these people. And then you come up with something that I hadn't thought about, which is a parody about democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please go deeper there?
This is funny. I mean, let me be blunt. Dunsany, had a great suspicion of universal democracy, or at least universal suffrage. And this was a common understanding in his age, and quite frankly, in ours too. I think we ourselves are facing the prospect of whether people are intelligent enough to vote, but we have a big problem with that in America, as you know. But 2 days from now, we will be in a much better position. I'm confident, but no matter. I'm
hoping
it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Okay. Anyway, this parliament, is very funny. They're all old men, and they just they think that by voting they can subvert or convert reality to their wishes. When Alveric's son, the magical son of Alveric and Lirazel, Orion, goes hunting for unicorns. We say Orion in
cool. Thank you.
Constellation. I don't know where it is, but no matter. Orion, hunts the unicorn, kills the unicorn. I'm sorry, I wish he didn't do that, but Dunsany was a great hunter, so that's the whole thing about hunting the unicorn. Anyway, he brings back the head of the unicorn, with the horn on the end, and of course, the Parliament refused to believe it, and they make very solemn decree. No, there was no unicorn here in Earl, as if it's right there, but by a majority vote they say, oh no, it's not there. So that is a very pungent parody of democracy.
And speaking of the characters, my personal favorite, I adore her, is the witch. So I wanted to know what you think of. Yeah, I adore that character. She's my absolute favorite.
Yeah, she's quite charming. I mean, although, quite frankly, as a man, I love Lirazel. I would.
Really?
She is every man's fantasy, I suppose. But although Dunsany doesn't actually describe her very carefully, and that's fine. That's good, because then each man can imagine her as beautiful as he wants, in every man's vision of the beautiful woman is different, but no matter. Zurundarel, very interesting. Dunsany always had a fascination with the witch. Throughout his life, he wrote all sorts of stories about witches, and they're generally good witches. They do good things. They are not the evil, witches with the bent nose and the peaked hat, although and yes, she does occupy a very, very key role in this novel. But it's I think to have a witch in Earl is to have just a little piece of weirdness and fantasy within that so-called realm of non-magic, and so that's the key to that whole novel.
Exactly. Okay, yeah, cool. So I'm concerned that you like Lirazel, because to me, she doesn't do anything, So at the beginning, she does try to feed, she can't feed, so she goes back, whatever. So this is as far as I know, this is one of your favorite paragraphs or passages of the whole novel, and I want to read it because it's beautiful. And this has to do with the moment in which the king sends, like Elfland's king sends for Lirazel throughout a ruin, right? So the quote goes, "And whatever magic there was in the ruin, of which I cannot tell, and dreadful magic there was. The rune was written with love that was stronger than magic, till those mystical characters glowed with the love that the elf king had for his daughter. And there were blended in that mighty rune two powers, magic and love. The greatest power there is beyond the boundary of twilight, with the greatest power there is in the fields we know. I'm reading this and I'm shaking because it's beautiful.
It's the gorgeous passage. It gets all
It's
choked
a
up.
gorgeous.
See that when people say Dunsany doesn't engage the
Exactly.
emotions, well, right
Exactly.
there is a refutation of that.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to ask you about. Go ahead.
Yeah, his writing can sometimes be a little remote. I understand that, especially when he's writing about the gods. The gods are meant to be remote.
Don't worry.
Phone, sorry. The gods are meant to be remote. They're up there in the sky, and they have very little concern about human beings. Um, but when he's talking about that king, the king of Elfland's daughter doesn't really do much either, aside from wanting to get his daughter back. But even he becomes a poignant figure. I mean, that passage itself almost says that love. In fact, it does say love is more powerful than magic. It is love that drew Lyrazel back to her home. And indeed, in the end, it was love that drew her then back to her husband and to her child. Because it's so I wouldn't say Lyrazel does nothing, but she maybe because Dunsany's a man and he has to write about somebody who, a man who's seeking a woman, wants her, loses her, and brings her back. But Lyrazel is an interesting figure because she goes back to Elfland, but finds it boring. She had gotten somewhat used to the fact that in the real world of Earl, things change. And that makes things interesting. It's frightening, but it's interesting. Change occurs all the time in our society, and we can be afraid of it, or we can go with it. And she seemed to have gotten sort of used to it, but then she's plucked back, and then all she does is sit on her father's lap, and nothing happens.
That's what I complain about. The father's lap.
Yeah. Well, but she loves him, but she loves her husband and child too. So it's a conflict there. Maybe that's all that Dunsany could have done, but he does. I think he does go into how she is, torn between these two things. Let me see if I have any notes on these things. Well, here, I mean, there's an earlier passage, even before. She says, Alveric has said, "I come from the fields that are mapped and known." And then Dunsany writes, "And then she sighed for a moment for those fields, for she had heard how life beautifully passes there, and how there are always in those fields young generations. And she thought of the changing seasons and children and age, of which elfin minstrels had sung when they had told of earth."
It also confronts us, doesn't it? I'm sorry, go ahead.
The people of Elfland, at least her, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, go ahead. Now you're back. Go ahead.
That was it. And that goes back to another thing that Dunsany wrote earlier on. There was a story called A Tale of London. This was in the last Book of Wonder, I believe, around 1916 or thereabouts. And he says, let me see what I say about it. A Tale of London, in which a hashish eater who has been commanded by a sultan to dream of London remarks, "Its houses are of ebony and cedar, which they roof with thin copper plates that the hand of time turns green. They have golden balconies in which amethysts are, where they sit and watch the sunset. Musicians in the gloaming steal softly along the ways. Unheard, their feet fall on the white sea sand with which these ways are strewn, and in the darkness suddenly they play on dulcimers and instruments with strings." Now he's describing the real world. I mean, somewhat glamorized perhaps, but it's still the real world. And so again, the realm of fantasy finds interest in the realm of reality, and vice versa. And that's one of the themes in this novel, I believe.
You also quote another passage. I'm only gonna read that because I think it's when I think of a book that I adore, especially, I don't know whether you know this, Esti, but the reason for which I decided to set up a publishing house is Lord Dunsany and the King of Elfland's Daughter, because I was obsessed by the fact no one had translated that book recently. I was unable to find a Spanish edition, regardless of where that edition was published. I wouldn't mind reading a Spanish from Spain edition or a Spanish from Argentina, but no one, like, it seems that it's the same sort of, yeah, it's like the same bad luck, you know? So it's very, very, very hard to find from Dunsany any kind of novel. We can find the Dreamer's Tales and the Gods of Pegania and those things, but it's impossible to find until now the King of Elfland's Daughter. So when I think of setting up a publishing house and opening up Perla Ediciones, whenever I'm asked, how did you come up with the idea of going crazy and being kamikaze, you know, setting up a publishing house? The answer is the King of Elfland's Daughter, because I feel so many things about it. To me. And then what I wanted to come up with is, when I speak about a book that I adore, I always say it is a poem. So whenever I speak about the King of Elfland's Daughter and people come to me like, hey, what do you like so much about it? I keep saying it's a poem. The King of Elfland's Daughter throughout is a poem, and editing it and translating it and bringing it to life decently and very accurately based on the original manuscript sounds like an amazing challenge. And that's the reason for which Perla Ediciones was born in the end. Something else that you have to know is that you are responsible for most of my literary tastes, because I've followed your career closely. I admire you. I adore everything you do. And the guys around know that. So thank you for everything you've done to bring up Perla Ediciones, because you're co-responsible. I don't want to scare you, but that's the truth.
No, that's great. I'm thrilled, because I'll tell you, I've been on a crusade for my Lord Dunsany ever since I myself read him as a teenager. I must have, see, of course, I started with Lovecraft, as you know. I read Lovecraft maybe at 13, 14, something like that. Very soon thereafter, though, I mean, I loved Lovecraft, but then I read his treatise, Supernatural Horror in Literature. And then I wanted to seek out all those books that he talked about in that treatise, because if he liked them, then I would probably like them also. And so at the age of maybe 15, 16, I first read Lord Dunsany, and I just fell in love with him. And I maintain Lovecraft's, Dunsany is a better prose writer than Lovecraft on the whole. It is a daring statement, but I'm convinced that it's true. Lovecraft is a great prose writer in his own way, quite different from Dunsany. He thought he was trying to imitate Dunsany in some of his early works. He didn't do a very good job of it, I'm sorry to say. But no matter, you know, it just shows how much he himself adored Dunsany. But when you read the entire work of Dunsany from beginning to end, you get an incredible revelation, both as to how many things stay the same, but also how many things change. He didn't write in the same way throughout his whole career. And some people don't like that later work, but I like it a lot, because he actually became quite spare. He almost became a kind of Irish Hemingway in some ways, using less metaphor and symbol and things like that. But some of these later works are incredibly powerful. I think, well, you know what I say about The Blessing of Pan, which is a novel he wrote about 3 years after King of Elfland's Daughter. Just, I'll tell you, that's another novel that just brings tears to your eyes. It is so beautiful. And again, there, the conflict of Christianity and paganism is at the heart of that novel. But Dunsany doesn't make fun of Christianity there. He really empathizes with the vicar, I think it is, who's trying to maintain the allegiance of his little town, but they're all going off, you know, to follow the pipes of Pan. Beautiful novel. And then, of course, I think his best novel altogether is one of his Irish novel. Oh man, I can't think of it now.
Bring it up.
I think of it. Hold on a minute. I'll get to it.
So you think that's even better than The King of Elfland's Daughter? We should publish that.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. No, I wouldn't. Well, as a novel, yes. The Curse of the Wise Woman. Both those novels, Blessing of Pan and The Curse of the Wise Woman, the fantasy element is substantially reduced Some people don't even think there is fantasy in them, but I think there's a thin thread of fantasy that still remains. Uh, King of Elfland's Daughter is certainly his greatest pure fantasy novel, no question about it. But these other novels have a richness and power of their own, and are well worth
Which one
reading.
do you like better? If you have to pick between those two.
Oh man, they're very different. Oh, I don't know. I would say The Blessing of Pan, only because The Curse of the Wise Woman requires a certain background in Irish history of the later 19th, early 20th centuries, because it's a lot about Ireland and the troubles between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland and things like that. But the figure of the wise woman there, I mean, talk about witches. She is a witch. I mean, a wise woman means witch basically in Ireland. That's what that phrase means, and you never know if she really has the power or not. And that's the beauty of that novel. You don't know if she has really done something supernatural or not at the end of that novel. I won't give it away otherwise, but it's an incredibly powerful piece of work, but does need some background in Irish history to get it.
Do you know that in Spanish you cannot find any novel whatsoever? So it is not until now that Perla Ediciones is nothing. Like it's super tiny. It's us. It's you and us. It's Mexican based, independent, and we decided to publish The King of Elfland's Daughter. But besides that, you cannot find any of the full length novels by Dunsany, and I can't understand that. As a reader, reading Dunsany has given me much more pleasure than most of the things that I've read throughout my life, and I've devoted my life to reading. Of course, not
Yeah.
in contrast to you, this is nothing, but I've done the
I'm
effort.
much older than you, so I've been reading a long time.
But I've tried to read a lot, and when I came across The King of Elfland's Daughter, I was blown away. I thought this needs to reach as many readers as possible, because this goes beyond every single literary limit that I've ever been confronted to. And it has, I don't know, it made me cry.
Yeah, me too. We've still, last reading, I still cried over it.
Where did you cry?
Oh, I think, well, both when she left Alveric. I mean, I've been through a divorce. Mercifully, I have a second wife who's much better than the first one, but she's up there making dinner right now, and maybe she'll poke her head in later. But she's a wonderful woman, but very tolerant of my idiosyncrasies here. But it's just so to lose a loved one like that, just to, over a silly little spat, that's what basically it was. It's very poignant. But then when she comes back, and she was going to come back, we just didn't know how it was going to happen. In fact, we were talking a movie. I was reading this for this fifth or sixth, and I said, how can this, I mean, maybe it would be a beautiful movie, I'll tell you, just a beautiful one. But people, I think, would have a problem with the hunting, nowadays. I hate hunting. I can't stand, the killing of defenseless animals. And it occurred to me what could be done instead of Orion just killing the unicorn and hacking its head off. Oh, horrible. Because that would make him an unsympathetic character today. He would just capture the unicorn and bring it back alive, and then ride the unicorn, for the rest of the book, and that might get the same effect across. I think.
I think that there's.
I will suggest that to Neil Gaiman when he. Pardon?
No, I'm sorry. I wanted to mention that the unicorn scene is by far the most shocking thing you come across as a reader, because I couldn't possibly conceive that they were killing a unicorn. I was shocked. I had to go back, reread, and think, did he really kill the unicorn in such a horrible way? To me, that scene, in which the hounds go around the unicorn, and then they are they are very mean, It's not just like the unicorn is shot, but he's massacred. It's horrible. And that is really impressive. I was not aware that he was a hunter until I read it in your book. I didn't know that.
Well,
now
I'll tell you, Dunsany made no apologies for being a hunter. I mean, he would hunt in Ireland. He would kill hundreds of these birds called snipe, and eat them. I mean, he would, that was for meals. He would go to Africa and hunt Barbary sheep and rhinoceroses, and of course they weren't endangered then. They are obviously endangered now. You go to Dunsany Castle. You go to this room. There's a glass case with an entire stuffed lion sitting right there. On the floor is a huge tiger skin rug with the head still attached. There are heads of stags and things all around the house, mounted on the wall. That's what he was, and he made no apologies for it. And he says, this is what he said in the book, in Patches of Sunlight. I was taught to shoot by the bird Joshi, had also taught my father, though shooting did not become the favorite occupation of my life until a few years later. When it did, it took me out into the woods and over the countryside, once again to destroy, as when I collected butterflies, but learning something of the ways of the world where they are untainted by cities, which fishermen, sportsmen, soldiers, and many another will agree is a knowledge that seems to be able to be acquired only able to be acquired with the help of killing. Well, nowadays we don't kill, we do, safaris of people just watching animals in Africa, and they're much better, shall we say. But to Dunsany, hunting was a way of going back to nature. It is understanding how the natural world works, and he did kill for sustenance. He did eat what he killed. He also killed foxes because they, threatened wildlife, or threatened livestock, chickens and things like that. Dunsany Castle still has about 200 acres, I think, maybe more than that. I don't know. I can't remember how many. And there are people who still have sheep grazing on that property. So there's still a sort of a working farm to some small degree. So this is just a side of Dunsany we have to accept, and that's just a different time. We can't pass judgment on him for that.
Of
from
course.
Our perspective.
So I totally agree. And you mentioned something that I find impressive. Again, I was not aware he was a hunter, but I was aware he was a rich lord. So he even acknowledged, or he thought, or his main hypothesis was, people don't read me, or people don't like me because I'm rich and because I belong to this super rich circle in Ireland / England, whatever. But you point out that the fact for which people looked down at him was actually because he was a hunter. And that has never been an acceptable behavior throughout history, right? If I got it right.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. No. I mean, see, hunting in the upper classes of England and Ireland, that's what they did. As I say, they justified fox hunting because the foxes come after our chickens and sheep and stuff like that. That was largely a charade. They hunted because it was a sport, and a sport that had long tradition amongst the aristocracy and the nobility. And if you were an aristocrat, that's what you did. You got this whole hunting gear on, with your horses and your dogs. Had the so-called master of foxhounds. You had to have the guy who led the hounds, on their hunt and trained them and looked after them. A very important position among the nobility. So there was a huge tradition of it. Even now, I can't remember the latest details, but whether fox hunting has actually been abolished in England, but there was a big to-do about it, when they tried to abolish it some years ago, and the what's left of the aristocracy says, hey, you're taking away our traditions, what can you do? I mean, that's the way it is. So, I mean, it's horrible to us, but it was defended for a long time.
Okay, so I did come across the fact he was a hunter in your book, and it only made me think of the unicorn, because I couldn't sleep when I came across the unicorn scene. It was too tough to actually digest.
It was not just, remember, there were other, there were other unicorns. It's not, he didn't kill the only unicorn. There were other ones. The unicorn seemed to have this ability to go back and forth from Elfland to our world and back again. So there were others that weren't killed. So,
Okay.
whatever.
Yes. Still, you agree that I did cry when I came across the hunting of the unicorn, because again, it was really mean. It's not just shut up the unicorn. Like, it was the way in which you can look at the corpse of the unicorn and all of the hounds going over the corpse, and it's super impressive. I was really impressed. And then what happens? Orion is the character that I like the least. I don't like that guy. I actually hate the guy. I don't like him. Yeah, I cannot be empathetic. I don't like Orion. So he goes back to Earl. And what happens? Coño, the guy killed a unicorn in the worst possible way, and then the parliament doesn't believe that's a unicorn. So then you laugh after you already after you already cried because of the hunting of the unicorn. And there was no way, to create a book cover that did not bring the unicorn to it. So when I was talking to this amazing illustrator, and he asked me, what do you want me to show on the cover? I was clear about the unicorn hunting. And he still remembers that, a 1-hour phone call where I told him how the unicorn was killed. And I've never invested so much time with an illustrator to let them know what I wanted to show, what I wanted to show on the cover.
This famous frontispiece by Syme has all these dogs, attacking the unicorn, and of course, Orion doesn't use a gun. I think he uses a sword or something like that.
I think the hounds go first, right? Like the hounds go first, and
the
then
hounds
he goes
got to him. Yeah. Then he chops the head off. But
you're
whatever.
right.
I think again. I'm not even sure why that scene is there, quite frankly, but maybe it's meant again to suggest, because it's meant to draw Orion closer to Elfland, and that's where he begins to sense, he hasn't been told exactly who his mother is,
No.
and what sort of this dual ancestry. I'm part of the real world, but I'm also part of Elfland. And so I think that's the whole focus of that unicorn scene.
It's impressive that you think he's gonna go through the threshold, right? You think he's gonna go in because he has the power to actually penetrate the threshold, and I don't know. It's very exciting. And when they Dunsany, that he takes that away from you as a reader, like, no, he's rather gonna kill the unicorn, and he's not gonna cross the threshold, and that was frustrating as well. Like, coño, are you kidding me?
Well, no, that would have sort of given things away. You can't have that happen until the end, and even then, it really doesn't happen. It's not as if I think Alveric has to do that first. He's the one who has to penetrate and get to Lirazel first, because he's the one who's really seeking her out. I'll tell you, this law, that Alveric is crazy to undertake. That is brilliant. It's just, they go on for 10 years, or more, trying to get some sort of entry into Elfland, and it keeps going away from them. And then he realizes, oh, it's because my magic sword
that's amazing.
Letting the king know that I'm nearby, and so he has to get rid of that sword before he can actually go into Elfland. That's just
that is amazing. And how come, humans, or humans like us do not get to finally cross the twilight, but in the end, thanks to the final rune, the twilight comes and invades Earl. And that is wonderful. I didn't see that happening at all. And when that happened, I was like, coño, thank you, Dunsany, for making this happening. That's very impressive as well. Everything in this novel is, to me, it's pure.
It's a brilliant
poetry.
Resolution.
It's a brilliant resolution, yes. You also write, the King of Elfland's Daughter is very close to the pinnacle of Dunsany's novelistic achievement. In its unparalleled beauty of style, its emotive power, and its complex interplay between nature, art, and religion, it rightfully takes its place as a masterwork of fantastic literature. How come? I totally agree. I look up at you, I follow everything you write, and I super agree on that. How come most people are not even aware the book exists? that is, to me, nowadays that remains as a mystery. I don't get it.
Well, I'll tell you. This novel has always had a readership, at least in the United States, England, the English-speaking world, because I think Dunsany himself had a high regard for it. He says, "I never wrote more, beautiful prose than in that novel." He says that somewhere in his autobiography. Um, I can't remember the details. I compiled a bibliography of Dunsany some years ago, but in around 1970, there was an American editor named Lynn Carter who established with a publishing company, Ballantine Books, paperback company. The Ballantine adult fantasy books of the shorter stories of Dunsany, and he did reprint The King of Elfland's Daughter. And that book went through a number of different editions in that edition. So it has always been, a sort of a landmark of fantasy literature for English-speaking people. I don't actually know if it's still in print now. I suspect it is, but it has always been sort of a touchstone. It is, to that degree, it is well known. I think Dunsany is often seen as just a precursor to Tolkien.
Mhm.
In my estimation, I think he's a better writer than Tolkien, but
way better. I totally agree. Way better. Yes.
I suppose so. And Tolkien, had mixed feelings about Dunsany. He was not always polite about Dunsany when he wrote about him in letters and things like that to others.
What did he
He had
say?
some. Oh, they're very slight comments. I mean, Tolkien's letters are not really very revealing about a lot of his attitudes, but every now and then he dismisses Dunsany a little bit because I think because Tolkien was very, and I don't think he liked the anti-religion of Dunsany. That I think that offended him to some degree, and he
I'm
didn't want
sorry.
to seem
Could you
as
please
if he was
repeat
just
the last
copying
part?
Dunsany. So he tried to. Tolkien was very a very religious man. He was,
Okay.
and Lord of the Rings is full of religious imagery.
Mhm.
As he was a Catholic, and I think he sensed that Dunsany was pretty hostile to religion, in his own subtle way,
Oh,
and so
okay.
that may have offended him. And again, he didn't want to come across as just an imitator of Dunsany. So I think to some degree he wanted to say, "Oh well, Dunsany's doing this and I'm doing that, and so there's really no influence," but there was an influence.
Of course. Like to me, the Lord of the Rings is an echo of the King of Elfland's Daughter, or perhaps that's my predisposition. But I keep looking at the way it was influenced by the King of Elfland's Daughter. I'm not such well informed on the whole of Dunsany's work as you are. But this novel to me means the world. When I look at Terramar, oh my God, like how Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. She's a goddess to me.
Yep.
I adore Ursula K. Le Guin. Like she's my total goddess. I adore her.
Yep.
And speaking of which, I also have a god. So I am the most atheist person you can think of. There's not such a super atheist thing, but I'm very atheist. But still, when I think of a goddess, I think of Ursula K. Le Guin. And when I think of a god, and you mentioned him, and I would love to hear what you have to say about him, is Jorge Luis Borges. You bring up the volume he compiled about Dunsany, and I would love to know if you're like how acquainted you are with his work and everything he did for fantasy fiction and such.
Oh, Borges is an incredible figure. I need to read much more about him than I have, but life is short. I could keep being dragged in other directions. I have a tremendous admiration for Borges, and I'm delighted that most of his work is available in English, because I would not trust myself to read it in Spanish. But he was, he wrote this. I find Borges' connection to Lovecraft also very interesting. He this little book called Introduction to North American Literature, in which he has like just one little paragraph about Lovecraft, but he has about the same amount on Poe and Hawthorne and many of these other writers too. So he felt that Lovecraft was just as important as them. And late in life, he wrote a story called, in English, it's called "There Are More Things," which was dedicated to the memory of Lovecraft. Really a powerful story. Published in the Atlantic Monthly, and then it was published in the Book of Sand. So it's, I like to call upon Borges as a way of validating Lovecraft. If Borges likes Lovecraft, then there must be something to Lovecraft.
You know that in Spanish? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't know how much I don't know how much Dunsany Borges read, how much he was influenced by him, but that would be worth. Somebody should investigate that sometime.
Like, he was an absolute fan. He adored Dunsany. He wrote so much about him. And actually, we have these back text quotes in order to get more sales of the book, hopefully. Yeah. So one of the which comes from you. They're like, Esti, I cannot express how much I admire you personally and how much Perla Ediciones. Nice. Did you notice that?
Maybe I didn't, or maybe I did at first, but I've forgotten about it. But, that's fine. Thank you.
No, thank you.
So where does this Borges?
So
where does this Borges quote come from?
Oh, Borges wrote. Oh my God! Now I have it in Spanish, and I'm very excited as to translate, but as to simultaneously translate. But he says he was the maker of such an amazing or crazy universe, of a personal kingdom that was for him the most intimate substance of life. So he was really, really, really a fan. He was a very close reader. And what I wanted to say is that in Spanish, to me as a reader, Jorge Luis Borges actually invented the fantasy literature because he was the first one to come up and say, this is worth reading, regardless of what the intellectual circle tells you is worth or worthless. This is amazing, and this blows off your mind. And that's one of the reasons for which I totally adore Borges. So when I came across his name in your book, Creator of Gods and Men, I was super excited about it, because what Borges did for fantasy literature is unparalleled in Spanish. No one has ever done what he did in Spanish in order to make readers aware of the value of fantasy literature, and that is amazing. And I'm glad you're acquainted with his work. And how are his translations?
I need to read much more. I have his collected stories in English and many other books, but oh man. Just there's so little time. You can't believe how much I have to read other things.
Of course, I know how much you have to read.
Let me tell you, I'll be back in one moment. I want to show you.
Of course. Chicos, si tienen preguntas, creo que es momento de que las escriban en el chat. Aquí tengo una solo.
You were talking about Ursula K. Le Guin.
Of course.
And I'll tell you. Okay, so for this is a book that I edited for Penguin Classics in the land of time and other fantasy tales. And I'll tell you what, I started working with Penguin Classics around 1999, and because they wanted me to do some volumes of Lovecraft. So I did 3 volumes of Lovecraft, which is nearly the whole of his short fiction. Then I did an Algernon Blackwood volume, but I kept saying, you have to get Dunsany in Penguin Classics, and they were resistant because I don't know why. Maybe they didn't think it would sell very well, or they didn't think Dunsany was worth it. But at long last, I finally persuaded them to let me do a volume of Dunsany. And of course, I chose the short stories. You can only do short stories in a volume like this, but I used stories from from the beginning to the end of his career. And I think this volume came out well. When it came out, it was reviewed in the Los Angeles Times Book Review by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Oh my God!
Oh, she wrote this full-page review. She thought it was fabulous, and I was touched. I said, to have.
Did you ever meet Ursula? Did you get to meet her?
The funny thing is, I live in Seattle, Washington. She actually lived, I think, later in life in Portland, Oregon, which is only like 300 miles. No, less than that, about 200 miles south of here. But I'm not acquainted with her, so. And she was quite old at the time, so I didn't want to bother her. But
I'm gonna track that review down, ST. We have to read that.
Oh,
Like,
it's
whatever
easy.
she-
I'm sure you can find it on the Los Angeles Times website. But I think she actually criticized me for including some of the later stories because, and I mean, everybody loves the early Dunsany, but
Mhm.
I think the later stories are worth reading also. Um, and these prose poems that he wrote, oh man, I actually even like those stories of Jorkins,
Uh-huh.
these sort of tall tales that he wrote. There,
Mhm.
Lovecraft hated them. He called them tripe, which is a very bad thing to say. But I think they're fabulous. And you know, oh, what can you say? Um, I tell you, I have a dream of publishing the collected short fiction of Dunsany. It would take up about 4 or 5 very large volumes. Once, if I can ever get permission from the estate, I would love to do that. Because there is still, believe it or not, there are still a few unpublished stories in at Dunsany Castle or wherever. I don't think they're great stories, but they're there. You know, they're
Of
stuff that we
course.
haven't read before and it hasn't been published before. So, and there are some unpublished plays also. I love his plays. I think they could still be acted today, a lot of them. I assembled a volume of his collected plays. I'm trying to get permission to get it published. It's 1,000 pages. It's a huge volume. And again, it has a number of unpublished plays in it. There's one full-length play called The Strange Lover, which is basically the Frankenstein's monster told from his perspective, and he falls in love with a human woman, and it's a wonderful play, and would work very well, I think, on stage today.
Okay, I don't know if you're, I guess you're connected with the estate, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure they're gonna get you, like, give you whatever you ask them for, because it's you, and nobody's looking at Dunsany, and we should
Well,
all
you
look
would
at
like to think so,
Dunsany.
but sometimes, so, well, this is they have agents in London, Curtis Brown, and they sometimes drag their feet and take a long time to get anywhere, which is that's understandable. That always happens, but and sometimes they don't want people to have a corner on this work. You know, I mean, we're not asking for exclusive rights. We just want to get this edition published and see if people want to go act it today. There is even in New York, I think there's an Irish repertory theater company in New York City. And they could probably do some of these plays, you know, these little one-act plays that were hugely successful in Dunsany's own time, and no reason why they couldn't be acted today.
Okay, so I wrote down The Strange Loner. That's the title, right?
Lover.
Oh, yeah, Lover. I'm sorry.
Lover.
Yes, I'm gonna look that up. In Spanish, he's quite a mystery. Still, he's a mystery. So what you can look at
Oh,
and what you can actually find is the short stories, but not the long novels or the plays, not at all. And speaking of
right.
which, you have we have the pleasure, the honor to have you around for 15 more minutes. So I asked the guys to please share their questions with me, and I have a couple of those. So,
Okay.
guys, if you have any more questions, please feel free to share them on the chat. So, first of all, Marcelino wants to know. Oh, this is huge. This is a huge question. So he wants to know your opinion about the power of words associated with magic throughout the King of Elfland's daughter. How language, like the power of language to transmit magic. I guess that's what he meant.
Yeah, well, oh, it's funny. I think Dunsany says there are 3 powerful runes that the king has, and he doesn't want to waste them, especially that final rune, which you to assume uh, Earl into Elfland, because I think he's afraid that he needs that rune in the case of some, you know, other threat that might come in future years, you know, and then he would have no runes to protect the realm of Elfland. Um, I don't know what else to say but that, but you know, it's you know, in a sense, that's a metaphor for the power of Dunsany's own language to create this whole realm out of nothing. But it's not out of nothing. Remember, Elfland is simply a heightening of our world, but he does it through language and through the magic of his own prose. And I think that's what he's trying to get at in creating these runes.
When you try to exemplify that in your book, creator of Gods and Men, you quote this passage that I personally adore. And I'm going to go through it because it's beautiful and it's short. And you're right. Know then that in Elfland our colors more deep than are in our fields, and the very air there glows with so deep a lucency that all things seen there have something of the look of our trees and flowers in June reflected in water. And the color of Elfland, of which I despair to tell, may yet be told, for we have hints of it here. The deep blue of the night in summer, just as the gloaming has gone, the pale blue of Venus flooding the evening with light, the deeps of lakes in the twilight, all these are hints of that color. And with the point you make, it's beautiful, which is it's inspired in the world we inhabit, but it's brought to a different level of magic or depth or fantasy. So I have another question.
But remember, the prose is not really dense, not full of adjectives and things like that, which is what Lovecraft tends to do, especially when he tried to imitate Dunsany. It's actually a very clean, almost simple prose, but Dunsany knew the power of every single word in a sentence to make that kind of impression. And the funny thing is, he himself states virtually everything he wrote is a first draft, right? He never went back to revise a text. Very few. And I've seen some of these books. It's amazing. You go to Dunsany Castle and you can find his own handwritten manuscripts. In fact, later on, it's very funny. In the 1950s, when he was an old man, he started writing in crayon, which is odd. And they got somebody else to type it up for him. He had a secretary to type it, but he always wrote it in hand. And of course, earlier on, he wrote with that quill pen. He had geese on his own property, and he'd pluck one of their feathers and sharpen the end and would dip it and use that to write with, and wrote an essay about it, writing with a quill pen. But he says he never revised. Everything comes out as first draft. He says, if I don't get it right the first time, then I just won't get it right, and it'll be awful. But going back, he just it was it either came out of him or it didn't. And to imagine that something like this came out as a first draft is just amazing.
It's just amazing. I need to ask a personal question, which is, am I allowed to the Dunsany Castle if I am not ST Joshi? Can I just go pay a visit once COVID is gone, or not?
I think every now and then, especially in the summertime, I think they do open it up to visitors. And in fact, I think they used to have it. I think there's a website called dunsany.com. You go there. They're selling linens and stuff like that. I mean, like all aristocratic families, they're heavily taxed, and they need to raise revenue. So they're selling stuff, through their website and stuff like that. And I think they do take in visitors. But someone like you, actually, I could even put you in touch with Randall. You should send it. You should ask the current Lord Dunsany, Randall Plunkett, whether he's. I wonder if he's gotten a copy of this book. If you sent
I sent 8 copies to the castle, so somebody has that.
Well, let's go. So the thing is, he's not there. The other thing about Randall, he's trying to direct movies, and he's done a few horror films, very short horror films. He did a short film called I can't remember the title of it now, but it's a zombie film, like 16-minute zombie film, actually quite good. You can find him on, I think his production company is called Dunsany Productions.
Wow.
and and he goes by the name Randall Plunkett. He doesn't call himself Lord Dunsany in that context. But he is, he's trying to direct films. He says he doesn't actually want to direct any films of Lord Dunsany because it's not probably something that it's not to his, I wouldn't say it's to his taste, but it's maybe he doesn't feel he could do it well enough or something. But he's apparently working on some sort of full-length film, a horror film. So
okay.
Yeah,
it's super impressive. I don't know whether you've seen this edition by actually Ballantine Books, which is, this is the Ray, but it comes next to Ballantine.
Yeah,
and this is where the foreword by Neil Gaiman comes from. And he's such a fan of Dunsany Why doesn't he write the script? I don't get it. I mean, clearly
He
I'm not in
should.
touch with
I
him.
really have to persuade him, because I mean, if
Yes.
anybody could do it, he could. And
Yes.
actually, number Del Toro will be great, but other people could do it well. I would like to see. I mean, it will be sort of a mix of live action and animation. I don't think it'll be. I don't think it should be all animation, because I think you want to set it in the real world too. You want to get that sense of the real world going into Elfland. And with special effects, you could have a magical film. It would just be fantastic.
Please persuade him. We trust
In fact, the novel is actually now in the public domain, so
yes,
you wouldn't even have
of course.
So whatever, anybody can do it. You don't have to pay anybody for rights.
Well, we ask you to please persuade Gaiman to do so. We will die out of excitement.
I don't know him directly. I know people who know him, so maybe I can get through that way. But
okay.
Oh yeah.
So Enrique says that in the Gods of Pagana, or however we pronounce that again, he even mentions Hobbit. The word comes across. And then once Tolkien finally published The Lord of the Rings, he doesn't even acknowledge having read.
Wait. Say that again. Dunsany mentioned.
He says that, why do you think Dunsany doesn't have so much, it's not so well known? In the Gods of Pagana, the word Hobbit comes up for the first time, and Tolkien never makes any mention about it.
I don't think that's right. I don't believe that that's the case.
Okay.
No, I don't think that's right. But the thing about, as I talked about Dunsany earlier on, as I say, I think partly because the best of Dunsany is in the short stories, and people prefer to read novels than stories. Which I understand that, because you can really immerse yourself in a novel, where, especially in a trilogy, that just goes on and on and on. You can feel as if you're living in that world. Whereas a short story, well, it's over in a couple of pages, and then you have to, start over again with a new idea and things like that. But and I think to some degree, I think Dunsany's work. How can I put this? I wouldn't say it's too elevated for people, but it has a certain kind of aristocratic bearing that maybe doesn't really, get to people. You have to have a certain mindset to really get into it. But as I say, I mean, Dunsany keeps around. He's still living, in that sense. I mean, I've gotten a lot of his books republished. In fact, I was lucky enough to be given the manuscript of Dunsany's last novel, which was unpublished at the time. There's a librarian at Dunsany Castle who kind of looks after the stuff there, and he found this unpublished novel called The Pleasures of a Futuroscope. It's kind of a science fiction type thing. And I got it into print, from my little press here in New York City. So I got the Jorkins stories back into print, three volumes of Jorkins stories. I got this Penguin Classics edition, and I'm working on other things. So I'll tell you, I will not let Dunsany die. He's there. He's a presence.
We're gonna Perla Edición is gonna follow that closely to see what we can actually, because in Spanish, Mexico has the most strict copyright law throughout the Spanish-speaking world. So even though nowadays in Spain it's already copyright free, so it's like in public domain, in Mexico we have to pay full royalties, and I have to get permission and everything, because that has to do with how strict Mexico is in terms of copyright. That's weird, because clearly Mexico is not really strict in many things, but still the copyright law is very, very, very tough. So I do have to pay for every single thing, and I'm in touch with Curtis Brown, and they've been very kind. So I am hoping to actually get another novel to translate it and print it under the Perla Ediciones imprint, because I, as well as you, are a total fan of Dunsany. Perhaps we have the chance to ask 2 more questions from the guys.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
So Alicia asks, she says, I'm reading, you've mentioned previously your fascination with Lyroselle. I perceive a trace of her in Tolkien's own elf princess, Arwen. Yet some abstract qualities, the substance of magic, seem kind of absent in her. What constitutes the main pillar of Lyrazel's figure to you?
I'm afraid a lot of that was broken up, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah.
What constitutes the main pillar of Lyrazel's figure to you? That's the main question.
To me, well, I'll tell you. I mean, as I say again, I think I have to look at it from a male perspective. You know, it's she is the embodiment of all female beauty to me. And I mean, I picture her in one way. Maybe another man will picture her in a different way.
How do you picture her?
But you know, I mean, what man wouldn't want a? I picture her as a blonde-haired woman with long flowing hair, and how can I put this? A somewhat, I wouldn't say blank expression, but you know, so very pure features. You know, just, I mean, something you could never tire looking at. There aren't very many women like that. Not very few men like that. I'll tell you, very few. Fewer men than women like that. I'll tell you, one man who was like that was the late Sean Connery, who just died. I pay tribute to Sean Connery. I loved him as a great actor. But anyway, and I'll tell you, so you know, again, but even though she doesn't actually do much, she is the source of Alvaric's quest. You know, he can never give up this quest to win her back. And you know, maybe that's a very male sort of thing, that we have to go after this thing. We will never, you know, allow ourselves to be defeated. The triumph over adversity, in that sense. But you're not really conquering anything. You're just trying to win back your true love. So that's all she has to be. Is she just has to be there, you know. And so that's part of that's her magic.
There's so much magic in her. Natalia wants to know. Oh, she's a huge fan of poetry, and she wants to know, what are your personal recommendations of Dunsany's poetry?
Again, you'll have to repeat that last part.
I'm sorry. What are your personal recommendations of Lord Dunsany's poetry?
I'll tell you, it's funny for a writer who was such a great prose poet, you know, wrote such great poetry in prose. His actual poetry doesn't actually amount to that much. He wrote a lot of it. Believe me, he wrote a whole lot of it. But it's somewhat routine and mechanical. It doesn't really, it doesn't have the same sort of evocativeness. Probably the first two books of his poetry, let me see if I can remember the titles. I think they are, let me see. Okay, 50 poems actually has some really good stuff in it, and Mirage Water, 1917, called Songs of an Evil Wood. It's a quite somewhat lengthy poem that's actually quite powerful. And I'll tell you, here, I'm sure I mentioned this in the book, but it's worth repeating. To get an idea of how famous Dunsany was, Armistice Day of 1918, you know, the World War I finally over, November 11th, 1918. The London Times published one poem in its issue of that date. That poem was by Lord Dunsany. Right? Of all the people you could have picked to write the poem for Armistice Day, they chose Lord Dunsany. And he wrote a poem called A Dirge of Victory, which shows, I mean, Dunsany knew what an ambiguous victory it was, you know, that at the end of World War I. World War II was very different. You know, there we defeated true evil. World War I was a much more complex and ambiguous struggle. Basically, it was a struggle between Germany and England for economic superiority. It was not necessarily that the Germans were all evil and we were all good, not by any means. So Dunsany recognized the you know, very complex nature of that struggle, and this little sonnet he wrote, A Dirge of Victory, is really a poignant piece of writing. That is actually one of his better poems.
If you had to pick one book to keep publishing him in Spanish, I know this is a tough question, Esti, but it means the world to me as an editor. What would you go after? And perhaps we can see that happening 1 year from now in Verla Ediciones for the world in Spanish.
Oh, I would love to come to Mexico to personally promote these writings. In fact, it was funny. I'm working a lot with a Brazilian publisher. In fact, several Brazilian publishers. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'll have 2 different podcasts in Brazil. There's a publisher, Hedra, they down in Sao Paulo. They do a lot of, obviously, the Portuguese work there, mostly relating to Lovecraft. They've done a number of editions of Lovecraft, but they like the Gothic horror work. I'm not sure they like the fantasy so much. Yeah, I tell you, my wife has been to Mexico, and I would love to go to, especially the old remains in the Yucatan. The old megalith, the pyramids down there. I would love to go there. But and Mexico City, what an incredible place that must be. One of these days, once all this horrible virus is over, I will head down there definitely, and then you won't be able to get rid of me.
Whenever you want to come, there's a place and a home and meals for you, and a huge number of fans who follow you and admire you and are very thankful because you joined us tonight. Thank you so much.
It's been great talking to you.
Is there anything you want to say as to close the session, or your wife is waiting for you with the best dinner ever on Sunday?
Yeah, she's making a great lamb stew that I'm supposed to be devouring right now. So.
Great.
Wonderful.
Yeah, you need to go to her.
All right. Well, wonderful talking to you. And
same here, Esti. Thank you so much. Thank you, and hope to see you again very soon.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.